Welcome to the deep dive.
Okay, so the UK general election, it's everywhere right now, and you can really feel the anticipation building, can't you?
Oh, definitely.
The big question isn't just, who might win. It's more like, why does this particular election feel like such a huge moment for Britain?
Exactly. And that's what we want to get into today. We're aiming to go, well, a bit deeper than just the headline polls you see flashing up.
Right.
We'll unpack the history, look at where the main parties actually stand right now, and explore those deeper things influencing voters, the public mood, turnout, which is always crucial,
Yeah.
messaging, leadership, credibility, all that stuff.
Basically trying to give you listening a real shortcut to grasp what's truly at play, yeah, without getting bogged down.
That's the plan. A clear picture.
Okay, good. So maybe the best place to start is by looking back a bit, like a quick tour of the last, four general elections, 2005 to 2019.
Yeah, that context is essential. It really shows how the ground has shifted and maybe what patterns we might see again. So 2005, that was Tony Blair, Labour's third win. Still got a decent majority, 355 seats, even with the Iraq war fallout hanging over him.
Right, a 66-seat majority. And the Tories back then, they were still, finding their feet after being out of power for a while.
What's the sort of key thing to take from that election, looking back now?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Even with that win, you could see signs of maybe public patience wearing a bit thin. Turnout was down.
Ah, okay.
It felt less like huge enthusiasm and maybe more like resignation. It
Yeah.
showed that even a solid majority can hide some underlying voter fatigue, kind of set the scene for changes later.
And things definitely changed by 2010. We went from that Labour majority to something quite different.
We really did. By 2010, things were fragmented enough that we ended up with a hung parliament. David Cameron's Conservatives, they won the most seats, but crucially, no overall majority.
Leading to the coalition, right, with the Lib Dems.
Exactly. Cameron and Nick Clegg. That was the Lib Dems' moment in the sun, really. Their biggest impact in modern politics getting into government.
But it didn't end well for them, did it?
No, it kind of sowed the seeds of their later problems. That whole breaking the promise on tuition fees. It cost them massively in terms of trust. Shows that power comes with sometimes a very heavy price tag.
Okay, so fast forward to 2015, another big moment. Cameron actually won an outright Tory majority, which surprised some people.
It did. But maybe the bigger story, certainly for Labour, was what happened in Scotland.
Right, the SNP. That must have been a hammer blow for Labour.
Oh, it was devastating. Labour got absolutely crushed by the SNP up there. Lost, I think it was 40 out of their 41 seats.
Wow, 40 out of 41.
Yeah. It just fundamentally changed Labour's route to getting back into power. And remember UKIP around then.
Nigel Farage's party, yeah. They got a lot of votes, but not many seats.
Exactly. Their vote share surged, but they only got one MP. It's a classic example of how our first-past-the-post system works or doesn't work, depending on your view.
Yeah, it can really skew the results.
Big time. Lots of votes don't necessarily mean lots of seats in Parliament. It's a recurring feature.
A feature that seemed to play out again in 2017, Theresa May's snap election. That didn't go to plan.
Not at all. A proper disaster for her, really. She called it expecting to boost her majority, but she actually lost it.
And Jeremy Corbyn's Labour did surprisingly well.
Yeah, they surged in vote share, got a lot of young people energized, but the result was, another hung parliament. May had to do that deal with the DUP from Northern Ireland just to stay in power.
A messy period.
Yeah.
Very volatile, especially with Brexit bubbling away.
Absolutely. And all that volatility sort of reached its peak in 2019. That was Boris Johnson's election, the Brexit election.
His big mandate. Landslide win for the Tories.
Yeah, a huge win. 365 seats, over 43% of the vote. And the insight there, it showed how a really simple, clear message, get Brexit done, could just cut through everything.
Got through the noise and the fatigue.
Exactly. Especially when delivered with, Johnson's particular brand of conviction. It reshaped traditional loyalties almost overnight. Labour just collapsed, especially in those working class areas, the red wall.
North and Midland seats that had voted Labour for generations.
Right. That election really did set the stage for where we find ourselves right now.
Okay, so that's the history at a real roller coaster. Let's zoom into today then, mid-2025. What are the actual numbers telling us? What's the polling snapshot look like right now?
Well, it's pretty stark, to be honest. Labour has this really dominant lead in basically all the national polls. We're talking consistently 15 to 20 points ahead.
15 to 20 points, wow.
Yeah.
And the Conservatives?
They're struggling. badly, polling somewhere in the low to mid-20s. I mean, put simply, these are their worst figures in decades.
That is a brutal place to be for an incumbent party. What about the others? Anyone else making waves?
Well, yes. Reform UK, Nigel Farage's party again, they're polling pretty consistently now, around 10 to 15%.
And crucially, who are they taking votes from?
Directly from the Conservatives. That's the key thing. They're eating into that Tory support. The Lib Dems and the Greens, they're sort of steady, but given the electoral system, they're unlikely to win a huge number of seats.
So it's hard for them to translate that support into MPs.
Exactly. Just to give you a concrete example, a recent YouGov poll, I think it was July 2025, had Labour on 42%, Conservatives way back on 23%, Reform UK on 14%, Lib Dems 9%, and the Greens on 5%.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of the numbers. But numbers are only half the story, right? We need to dig into the why. What's fundamentally shifted since that 2019 Johnson landslide to get us here?
Yeah, the why is critical. And probably the biggest single factor is, well, the conservative implosion. It's hard to overstate it.
You mean the leadership chaos?
Absolutely. 3 prime ministers in just 3 years. Johnson, then Truss, then Sunak. That kind of turnover, plus all the scandals and perceived mistakes, it's just really damaged the party's image. Their reputation for stable government is, well, gone.
And when you mention Truss, you have to talk about that mini budget, don't you? Was that the moment it all went wrong, or just the most obvious symptom?
That's a really good question. I think it was maybe less the single catalyst and more like throwing petrol on an existing fire.
Okay.
It directly tanked the economy, yes. Mortgages shot up for millions. It was a huge crisis of trust hitting people's finances directly, but it amplified frustrations that were already there.
Like what sort of things?
Well, the broader cost of living crisis, which is still biting, widespread strikes across different sectors, those massive NHS waiting lists everyone talks about, persistent problems with housing, affordability.
Just a general sense of things not working.
Exactly. And Rishi Sunak, while maybe seen as more competent than Truss, he just doesn't seem to have that broad popular appeal. The party overall just looks tired, chaotic, like they've run out of road, run out of ideas.
Okay, so that's the Tory side. What about Labour? How have they managed such a turnaround from that 2019 disaster? It's quite the comeback.
It really is. And it's been very deliberate. Keir Starmer has quite methodically cleaned house since the Corbyn era.
Pushing out the hard left.
Yes, purging those factions and very consciously repositioning Labour back towards the center ground, trying to look moderate, sensible is a word they use a lot.
So less about charisma, more about competence.
Pretty much. Starmer might not be, a Blair figure in terms of excitement, but he's definitely seen by many as competent, a safe pair of hands, someone who offers stability after all the chaos.
And their main message seems pretty simple.
Yeah, it's basically change but not chaos, and that seems to be hitting home with voters who are just exhausted by, well, years of turbulence.
Okay, and the final piece of this puzzle seems to be Reform UK, Farage is back. How significant is their impact? Is it just noise, or are they really changing the game on the right?
Oh, Farage's return is hugely significant, and it's incredibly bad news for the Conservatives.
Because they split the right-wing vote.
Precisely. Reform is actively peeling off voters from the Tories, especially in those Brexit-backing working-class areas that swung conservative in 2019. And here's the crucial bit. Even if Reform don't win many seats themselves, and they probably won't win many,
right,
they could easily cause the Tories to lose dozens of seats they currently hold just by taking enough votes away from them to let Labour sneak through the middle.
So they act as a massive spoiler.
A huge electoral spoiler for the Conservatives, yes.
Okay, so bringing all that together, the history, the polls, the party dynamics, what does it actually mean for the election result? Who's likely to win, and what kind of outcome are we looking at?
Well, barring some kind of political earthquake, all the signs point pretty decisively towards a Labour majority, and potentially quite a large one.
How do they get there? What's the path?
Their path involves, first, winning back a lot of those red wall seats they lost last time. Second, holding on to their existing strongholds, particularly in urban areas. And third, crucially, picking up seats directly from the Tories, partly thanks to Reform splitting that vote.
And maybe tactical voting helps them too.
Yeah, tactical voting on the left, where people vote for whichever candidate has the best chance of beating the Conservative. That could definitely amplify the swing to Labour in some areas.
So if Labour's looking at a potential large majority, does that mean we're really talking about a massive Conservative collapse? How bad could it get for them?
It could be profound. Some projections suggest the Tories could lose 150 seats, maybe even more.
150 plus, that's huge.
It's huge. Sunak's leadership is obviously under immense pressure, and you're seeing a lot of current Tory MPs deciding not to stand again, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall.
And that Reform UK effect you mentioned.
Yeah, you could almost call it the Tories' UKIP moment, but like times 10.
UKIP moment by 10. That paints a picture.
It really does. They're just bleeding votes to reform, even if reform isn't winning the seats themselves. It's a serious hemorrhaging of their traditional support base.
Given that scale of potential loss, is there any realistic chance we still end up with a Hun parliament? Or is that looking pretty unlikely now?
It's looking much less likely now than it did, say, a year or two ago. I mean, mathematically, it's possible if Labour somehow really underperforms compared to their current polling numbers.
But Starmer wants a clear win.
Absolutely. He'll be pushing hard for a clean majority. Having to rely on the Lib Dems or the SNP for support would just complicate things, dilute their mandate, make governing much harder. The momentum really feels like it's behind a Labour majority right now.
Okay, so let's assume Labour does get that majority, maybe even a big one. What does that actually mean for the UK going forward? What sort of policy changes might you expect to see economically? Foreign policy.
Right, the implications. Well, policy-wise, expect a big focus on the NHS reform funding. Investment in green energy is another key area, though they'll be careful not to scare off centrist voters.
So ambitious, but maybe pragmatic?
Yeah, I think so. Also, speeding up house building, doing something about renters' rights, addressing the housing crisis is high on their list, and generally trying to rebuild public services after years of, well, austerity.
And what about the B word, Brexit?
Crucially, they are not talking about reversing Brexit. That's off the table. Instead, you'll likely see a much quieter, more practical approach to rebuilding relations with the EU.
How so?
Focusing on specific areas like security cooperation, maybe easing trade frictions where possible, but definitely not rejoining the single market or anything like that. It'll be small steps.
Okay. And the economy? Will be radical change or more cautious management?
I'd expect more caution, definitely. Prudent fiscal policy will be the watchword. They won't want to spook the markets or businesses.
So no big tax rises for everyone.
Probably not across the board. But they have signaled targeted increases, things like taxes on private schools, maybe windfall taxes on energy firms, perhaps hitting the very wealthiest harder. They'll be very keen to project a business-friendly image, especially to the city and middle-class voter.
Trying to build that confidence.
Exactly. And on foreign policy, expect continuity on the big things, strong support for NATO, continuing aid to Ukraine, but also, as I said, trying to improve UK-EU relations pragmatically.
More focus on international cooperation generally.
Yes, likely more emphasis on things like climate diplomacy, working through international organizations, trying to rebuild the UK's standing on the world stage after a few turbulent years.
That gives us a clear idea of the potential direction. How does this potential shift compare to past elections? Is this like 1997 all over again, that Blair landslide that felt like a real political earthquake? Or is it different this time?
It's probably not quite a 1997-style revolution. That felt like a very specific new labor project, a conscious break. This feels maybe less ideological.
Okay.
But it could still be just as decisive in changing the overall tone and direction of British politics. Unlike Corbyn's Labour, Starmer's team is really focused on winning that center ground, being seen as responsible, not radicalizing the left.
So perhaps less about ideology, more about competence and stability.
That seems to be the pitch. And if Labour does win big, yeah, you could easily be looking at a decade or so of Labour government, similar to the Blair-Brown years. That would obviously fundamentally reshape the country's path.
Okay, so as we head towards polling day, and with everything we've talked about, what are the key things you should really be watching out for? What dynamics could still shift things or tell us something important about the final result?
Yeah, good question. Beyond just the headline national polls, what are the crucial undercurrents? Well, first, keep a close eye on turnout.
Always important.
Hugely. Low turnout might help the Conservatives hang on to a few more seats than expected, but high turnout, especially if younger voters show up in big numbers, that could really bury the Tories.
Okay, turnout. What else?
Second, that Farage factor we discussed. If reform gets another late surge in support, that Tory collapse could be even deeper than currently forecast. It just splits their vote further.
Right. Makes sense.
Third, watch Scotland. The SNP looks much weaker than in recent elections. Labour is hoping to gain maybe 10, 15, even 20 seats back up there. That would be massive for securing a comfortable UK-wide majority for Starmer.
A big prize for Labour if they can pull it off.
Absolutely. And finally, don't forget the liberal Democrats. Watch for potential surprise wins, particularly in those southern, traditionally Tory blue wall seats. They could take a few scalps where you might not expect it.
Okay, lots to keep an eye on there. So I guess the bottom line from our deep dive today seems pretty stark, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Unless there's some truly massive, unexpected event in the next few weeks, all the evidence suggests Labor is heading for victory and potentially a very convincing landslide win.
That's certainly how it looks right now.
And it sounds like the main driver isn't necessarily a huge wave of enthusiasm for Labor or a revolutionary new vision they're offering,
No, probably not primarily.
but rather, it's driven by how deeply unpopular the conservatives have become. They seem fragmented, tired, seen as out of touch by a large chunk of the electorate.
That sums it up pretty well. The dissatisfaction with the incumbent government is arguably the dominant factor here.
So maybe the really interesting question isn't if Labor wins anymore, but more about how big that win will be.
Exactly. How big is the majority? And maybe even more importantly, what kind of mandate does that give Keir Starmer?
Right. What does the public actually empower him to do?
Precisely. Will it be a mandate for bold, transformative change? Or is it more a mandate for simply cautious, competent management after years of chaos? That's the fundamental question, and the answer will really shape what the next UK government looks like and what it prioritizes.
Something for all of us to watch and think about as things unfold.
Definitely. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Thanks for watching the video.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If there's a specific topic you'd like us to cover next time, do let us know.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you found this one helpful, make sure to share it with others too.
See you in the next video.